Today I've fished on the fantastic River Trent on a stretch called the Nelson Field. The Nelson Field is just below the Burton Joyce roadside stretch. Now years ago this stretch used to be called the Golden Mile because the fishing was so good on the roadside stretch of the Trent. Now it's a place that I've sort of grown up fishing in my early days, in my early 20s. I fished a lot of matches here. They used to fish 110 peg winter matches all through the winter. And there were a lot of the best sort of Trent anglers that grew up fishing these matches, and it was very, very difficult to win these competitions because the anglers that fished were so good. But the fishing now is actually better than what it was back then. I mean, now the river is absolutely stuffed full of roach, dace, perch, and of course when the river's up and flooded there's also quite a lot of bream and chub to be caught as well. Now I've fished today just below the Golden Mile stretch, the roadside stretch in the Nelson Field, and this area has got quite a lot of flow on the water. It's the perfect area for dace. There's lots and lots of dace here, and this is the fish that I've fished for today, fishing with a feeder about maybe 25 metres out from the bank. To catch these fish, it's a ground bait feeder. A maggot type feeder doesn't seem to work quite as well for these dace. They like the ground bait. The ground bait that I mixed up today was just a bag of G5 black, about half a bag to 3 pints of brown crumb. There's also two choices of bait that I like to use when I'm fishing for dace with a feeder, and that's casters. Casters are a great additive because they fall on the floor of the river and they're great for the dace to home in on. But it's also quite important to add maggots and live maggots. There's a big trend today to fish with dead maggots, but I always think for smaller fish like dace, roach, perch, that live maggots is much better, especially on the river like this. Now I've already said that ground bait is the main key to fishing for these fish, so you've got to use a ground bait feeder, and the one I've used today is just 40 gram lead on that held the bottom perfectly at 25 metres. You want a little bit of movement, you want that feeder to just hold, and today 40 gram was about perfect for the flow that we had on the river. Today I've used a Vertex method feeder rod for fishing on the river, and it's something that I just stumbled across really. Although it's made for method feeder fishing, it's also great for fishing on the river in combination with a 3-ounce tip. Generally for all the fishing I do fishing with a feeder, when I've got the rod up in the air like I have today to get the line out of the water, a 3-ounce tip 99% of the time is the right tip to use for fishing like this. Also, it's a carbon quiver tip as well, which tightens up very quickly. And what this does, it exaggerates the bites. When you get a bite that dinks the feeder or dinks itself onto the hook, you can see the tip tightens up quickly, so you can see the bites easily. The next thing you need is quite a durable reel line, and I've used just a 6-pound camo, which is strong enough to deal with casting the feeder and constantly winding it back. The setup of the feeder makes all the difference when you're catching small fish on a feeder. As if by magic I've whipped you back to my tackle room just to have a look in depth at how I make this rig. The first thing I've done, I've got the rod off to the side out of the way, and I've got the main line, which is 6-pound camo reel line. The next thing then is to get the boom as such. It's got a diamond-eyed swivel on it. Now this is an important part of the rig because this needs to trap on the knot that I make. So it's a diamond-eyed swivel and just a clasp below for putting the feeder on. So this a thread onto the main line. I can put that out of the way and forget about that. The next thing then is to use a swivel bead. One side of the bead has a smaller hole than the other. So I thread through the small side of the bead. Once that's on the line then, you need to put the swivel in place. The swivel then, I just simply thread through the swivel and then I spin both lines together. So I'm spinning one way at one side and the opposite way at the other. So you're spinning opposite ways to spin the line together. Each time I spin, I pull that down to the swivel to tighten it down to the swivel as such. So I'm spinning it together. Once I've spun it together, then I can take hold of the line and then knot it off. So it's a simple task of once through and then over and back through again. Now then I'm going to pull this down. So it's about maybe 2 to 2.5 inches long. Always wet knots when you pull them together. Right, once that's been tightened up, that's the knot that's going to help to hook the fish. So then I can trim that off. Right, once you've done that, you can then pull down the actual bead onto the swivel. The boom then will pass over the knot. Right, so that's your boom and your twizzled piece of line. The next thing to do then is to add the power gum. I also use power gum now below so I can fish with quite light hook lengths. So just take a piece of the feeder gum. It's not power gum, it's feeder gum. Right, pass that again through the swivel and then you're doing exactly the same operation. You're just twisting the power gum, the feeder gum, I keep calling it power gum, the feeder gum together. Each time I'm just pulling it down to the swivel. Now to knot this off, I just use a very simple overhand knot. Right, it's not necessary to make a big knot. Once it's fastened with just one single overhand knot, it doesn't slip because it's like a rubber type. It sort of holds together really well with just a single knot and it's nice and neat. So I pull that nice and tight and that's the twizzle below the swivel bead. Right, once I've got the twizzle piece of power gum below the swivel, I can then make the connection for the hook length. And all I do again is pass the main line through a loop once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, one for good luck 7 times. Again, wet that and then pull it down. I want probably about maybe 5 to 6 inches of power gum below the feeder. So once you pull that tight, and just pull it nice and tight, don't over tighten it, otherwise you probably will break it, but you can tighten it down quite a lot. Right, once that's tightened, then I can trim off. I leave a couple of millimeters below that knot. I don't try and cut it really tight to the knot. So what you've got then, you've got a rig that once the line slides through, that knot hooks the fish. Right, it's a bolt rig as such, but what you've got then, the feeder can actually come over that knot. Right, so it's a safe rig as well. It's impossible. If you happen to break off, your fish is not connected to the actual feeder because it can come over the knot. Also, if you hook a big fish, once that line's straightened, right, you're not playing the actual feeder with the fish because it can come above the knot. It's a fantastic rig. I've used it for many, many years on the River Trent, and of course it's a safe rig as well. The hook on this rig has to be right. I've tried all sorts of different hooks, and the hook choice is a size 14 Camasan B512 that's a red hook. It's also quite a square hook, and it's also very, very sharp. When you're fishing for dace, roach, perch, and also maybe silver bream as well with a feeder, this is the best hook you can use because it penetrates the fish very well. The length of the hook length below the feeder, I started off today with about 60 centimetres of hook length. But what I found later on in the session, when the fish started homing in on the feeder, I shortened down to about 40 centimetres. And this helped to hook more bites as they bolted themselves onto the feeder rig. The feeder gun that I have below the swivel is twisted just for about maybe 2 inches below the actual swivel. And the reason for twisting it, I want it to stick out so you don't get any tangles as such with the feeder. It makes it hang down away from the feeder itself. And today I fished for maybe 4 hours and not had one single tangle. So this is how good this rig works. What you will have noticed today, I'd got 2 ground bait mixers on the actual stand outside of me. Exactly the same ground bait, no difference. But what I did, one mix, I've mixed casters and maggots into the mix, the separate mix where I've got. And what this does, when you think about it, once you've got particles, your casters, your maggots mixed into it, and you fill the feeder from that bowl, you've always got an odd maggot that's stuck to the bottom of the feeder and the top of the feeder. And what this does, as it's travelling to the bottom, there's odd maggots and casters come off that feeder. So they travel down through the water. And this is what you want to get bites on the drop. You want them odd particles coming off. But what happens when you're fishing constantly doing this, you start to drag too many fish off the bottom. So every now and again then I've swapped to the mix with no bait in it whatsoever, and I've added the casters and the maggots into the mix and then squashed the maggots and casters into the middle of the feeder so that there's next to no particles, no casters and maggots coming off that feeder as such. It travels to the bottom and then empties. Changing around the mix so you keep the fish down, but you also have them fish intercepting those particles as well that's coming off the feeder, is the way to catch dace. So you'll get bites more regularly than just fishing with a feeder that lands to the bottom with the bait plugged in the middle. So it's a great way to catch them, and the bites come immediately on the drop. So you can catch very, very quickly and build a weight. And this is the secret to catching dace. I've seen lots of anglers pulling their hair out on the bank, missing loads of bites. And until I sorted these tactics out, I had a very, very similar problem. If you take one big tip away from this feature today, it's having 2 ground bait mixers where you can change what you are doing. And it just doesn't work for dace, it works for silver bream, skimmers, and also roach if you're fishing on the river. When the river's up, there's lots of these sort of silver bream, especially down on the tidal lengths, and having 2 mixers works for these type of fish as well. If you do come to Burton Joyce, the road stretch, the Golden Mile where I mentioned earlier, is the stretch that is day ticket. So you can fish on a day ticket. It's Ashfield Anglers Water. The Nelson Field and Ferryfield are private, but the roadside is still fantastic fishing. Today I've probably caught about maybe 18 to 20 pound of dace, a great day's fishing. And a lot of these swims here at Burton Joyce are full of these type of fish, so you can get bites and enjoy a great day's fishing. If you follow these tactics and get yourself down here, you can catch a great bag of fish as well.